I spent 12 years shaping a reputation inside that building, 12 years becoming the person everyone called when something went wrong. I was the one who fixed crises no one else understood, the one who stayed when the lights were off, the one who carried project from the edge of collapse to million-dollar success. Every award the company received had my fingerprints on it, even if my name never appeared beside the achievement. I believed loyalty would eventually be rewarded. I believed effort would be seen. I believed patience would lead to the door marked promotion. That belief shattered in one morning. The Pentagon representatives arrived for the final evaluation of a $9 million contract. It was the most important project our department had handled in years. I had spent months perfecting the technical models, anticipating every question, preparing every contingency. I expected my boss to let me lead the presentation since I was the only one who mastered the details. Instead, he positioned himself at the front of the room as if he had written the project from scratch. I stood beside him with my notebook, ready to fill in the gaps he would inevitably create. I thought the worst he could do was take credit. I was wrong. When one of the representatives asked about the risk structure and requested clarification, my boss turned toward me with a smile I recognized too well. It was the smile of someone about to belittle you for sport. He placed a hand on my shoulder and said I was not management material. He said it loudly, clearly, and with the kind of condescending confidence that filled the room like smoke. The words echoed with a weight I could feel in my bones. The Pentagon officials froze. One of them raised an eyebrow. Another looked at him with confusion. They knew I had been the one sending the technical updates for months. They knew who actually kept the project alive. In that moment, something inside me went silent. Not from humiliation, but from revelation. I realized he had never intended to promote me. I realized I had been giving loyalty to a man who used my work as a shield and my effort as a ladder. I realized every late night, every weekend sacrificed, every quiet accomplishment had become invisible behind the arrogance of someone who collected praise for projects he barely understood. The silence inside me was not defeat. It was awakening. I looked at him and felt a calmness settle over me, the kind that arrives when you finally stop denying a truth that has been there all along. I thanked him in front of everyone. The simple words stunned the room. The Pentagon officials exchanged glances, trying to understand why I looked composed instead of broken. My boss seemed taken aback by my lack of reaction. He expected me to defend myself. He expected me to beg. He expected me to shrink. Instead, I walked away and returned to my desk with a quiet that carried more power than any argument. That evening, I did something I had not done in over a decade. I left at 6. I closed my laptop calmly, packed my things, and walked out while half the office was still scrambling to finish assignments I usually completed for them. I felt no guilt. I felt no attachment. I felt no obligation to save anyone from another disaster created by a man who believed leadership was a talent he was born with rather than a responsibility earned through respect. Let him feel the weight of every responsibility he had dumped on my shoulders. Let him manage the chaos he always pretended he controlled. Let him finally experience the consequences of his own incompetence. The next morning, I arrived on time instead of early. I made coffee instead of rushing straight into a crisis. I answered my emails slowly instead of cleaning up a dozen emergencies created by other departments. People stared at me like I had changed species. They were not used to seeing me relaxed. They were not used to seeing me uninterested in saving the day. They were finally seeing how much I had been doing without acknowledgement and how much the company depended on tasks I handled quietly because no one else could. Throughout the day, I observed panic spreading through the office. Technical questions piled up. Requests from the Pentagon were left unanswered. Problems grew as if they had been waiting years for me to step back. My boss kept pacing from desk to desk, searching for someone who could fill the void I had created simply by respecting my own job description. He insisted the team send updates they did not understand. He shouted instructions that contradicted the system architecture. Every mistake he made highlighted the truth he wanted to hide. He had never led the project. He had only stood in front of it. By late afternoon, the Pentagon requested urgent corrections. I watched the panic tighten my boss's face. He approached me with a forced smile, pretending the morning humiliation had never happened. I simply returned to my work. I follow my job description with precision. Nothing more, nothing less. The boundaries he imposed on me became the boundaries I enforced back on him. That was the moment he realized the truth. He had not humiliated an employee. He had silenced the only person capable of saving the company from itself. The humiliation he thought he inflicted on me had become a trap that swallowed him whole. The next morning, the office felt as if a storm had passed through during the night. People whispered when I walked in, their eyes following every step as if they expected to see cracks on my face. They were waiting for signs of humiliation, anger, or collapse. Instead, I carried the same calm expression I had left with the day before. That calmness unsettled them more than any outburst ever could. My boss avoided looking at me. He moved through the office with stiff shoulders, pretending everything was normal, pretending the previous day's humiliation was just another harmless comment. But the truth was already visible in the way people glanced at him, then at me, then back at their screens as if trying to solve a puzzle they had ignored for too long. He believed declaring me unfit for management would crush my confidence. He thought publicly dismissing my potential would keep me tied to the same quiet corner, doing exceptional work for minimal recognition. What he did not understand was that the comment did not diminish my value. It diminished his place in my life. Loyalty is fragile when it is only held together by respect, and he had shattered that respect in a single moment. That shift in my loyalty changed everything. I stopped answering emails after hours. I stopped covering for departments that relied on me more than they admitted. I stopped stepping into roles that were not mine simply because no one else could handle them. I followed my job description with precision, every task completed with professionalism, but never with the invisible urgency that once pushed me to work far beyond my limits. I did not need to announce the change. The silence communicated it better than any declaration could. By midday, the consequences of that shift became impossible to ignore. The Pentagon officials requested revisions for the $9 million contract. It was routine protocol, something I used to handle immediately, long before my boss even understood the request. He received the message and tried to act confident, but panic flickered in his eyes. He knew I was the only one who mastered the technical details needed for the revisions. He had spent 12 years pushing me away from leadership roles, assuming I would always remain dependent on his goodwill. Now he needed me more than ever, and I was no longer available to be his safety net. He called me into his office. His voice sounded strained, as if he expected resistance and was already exhausted before the conversation began. I stepped inside and stood calmly. There was no tension in me. No resentment, just a clear awareness of where I stood. He asked about the revisions. I explained that I was handling the tasks that belonged to my position and nothing more. I reminded him that the additional work he was referring to had never officially been mine. His face went pale. For the first time, he understood the magnitude of the mistake he made when he dismissed me in front of our most important clients. The contract depended on knowledge he did not have and respect he never gave. Without my willingness to bridge the gap, the entire project rested on uncertain ground. I returned to my desk without looking back. The shift had already happened. My coworkers sensed it too. They approached me cautiously, unsure if they should apologize, congratulate me for staying composed, or distance themselves from the unfolding tension. I greeted them politely but stayed focused on my tasks. I no longer felt obligated to carry the emotional weight of the office. I watched as small problems multiplied into larger ones, problems I used to resolve before they even reached the surface. Without my quiet intervention, chaos began creeping into every corner. Throughout the afternoon, the pressure on my boss intensified. Emails from the Pentagon piled up. The representatives wanted immediate answers. The analyst he tried to assign the task to barely understood the structure of the file. Every attempt to solve the issue revealed more layers of complexity. My boss paced around the office, sweat gathering along his forehead as he realized how much of the company's stability relied on knowledge he never valued. People who once assumed he was in control now saw the reality. He was not a leader. He was a shadow, standing in front of work carried by others. They noticed how often he called my name. They noticed how every important message pointed back to tasks I had handled alone for years. The shift in perception spread through the office like a quiet awakening. They finally recognized the difference between someone who occupies a position and someone who sustains it. Before leaving, I sent my final email of the day and closed my laptop exactly at 6. The office watched as I walked out. No hesitation, no urgency, no guilt. The silence that followed me out the door said everything. I was working within the limits he had set, limits he never expected me to take seriously. That night, I slept peacefully, knowing the balance of power had changed. For the first time in my career, I was no longer the one holding the company together. The shift had begun, and he was the only one sinking. By the third day, the office no longer felt like a workplace. It felt like a sinking vessel, each floor cracking under pressure no one knew how to handle. The Pentagon team demanded updated data, cross-department explanations, and a complete risk assessment that had to match their new compliance structure. These were tasks I used to complete quietly after 6 every evening, solving problems before they reached the surface. Without me covering the gaps, the deadlines slipped one after another, leaving a trail of unanswered requests and growing disappointment. The sound of panic carried through the hallways like a rumor too loud to ignore. People whispered near the elevators, eyes wide, voices tight. Something big was breaking, and everyone sensed it. My boss tried to hide the cracks by assigning my responsibilities to a junior analyst who barely understood the software. The poor kid looked terrified before lunch. He stared at the screen as if the files were written in a foreign language. Every time the Pentagon requested a technical clarification, he froze. He knew he was drowning, but could not admit it in front of a boss who punished honesty more than incompetence. By noon, he had made multiple errors that forced the Pentagon to send urgent follow-up messages. The situation grew worse with each passing hour, yet my boss kept insisting the team stay calm while he pretended everything was under control. Rumors spread like wildfire. People began whispering that the contract was slipping through our fingers. A $9 million deal that had taken 18 months of negotiation, revision, and delicate communication was collapsing at a speed no one had anticipated. All because the man who insulted me in front of our most important clients did not know how to run his own company. The board members grew restless. They scheduled back-to-back calls with the Pentagon, desperately trying to convince them that the delays were temporary. But the Pentagon representatives had already sensed the truth. They knew the work no longer had the precision and structure they were used to. They knew something essential had fallen apart inside the department. Inside the office, the tension became unbearable. I watched from my desk as people scrambled between cubicles, searching for missing data sets, incomplete models, and files they did not understand. The panic built until even the most confident employees looked uncertain. Everyone finally understood how much of the company's stability had depended on tasks I handled silently. Without intervention from me, the company's structure revealed its weaknesses one by one. The Pentagon team requested a final technical meeting to salvage whatever remained of the contract. The request alone terrified the managers because they knew my boss lacked the knowledge to present the material with the precision required. For years, he had stood in front of presentations I prepared, taking credit for analyses he barely reviewed. Now he had to defend a project he did not understand at its most crucial moment. The pressure broke him. He approached me mid-afternoon with an expression I had never seen on his face. The arrogance was gone. The confidence had evaporated. Only desperation remained. He needed me to save him. He needed me to step in, rebuild the fractured presentation, update the technical segments, and defend the contract with the authority I had built over 12 years. He tried to soften his voice, as if pretending the humiliation never happened could erase its impact. But nothing could undo the truth. He had disrespected the only person capable of rescuing the company from disaster. I looked at him with the same calmness I had carried since the day he dismissed my potential. I reminded him of his own words. If I was not management material, then I certainly was not responsible for saving a contract worth more than my annual salary. The sentence struck him harder than anything I'd ever said in my life. His face turned pale. His lips pressed together as if he wanted to argue, but could not find any ground to stand on. That silence was the final confirmation that the balance of power had fully shifted. I returned to my work as if nothing unusual had happened. Minutes later, he walked toward the meeting room with a stack of papers shaking in his hands. The staff watched him enter the conference with the defeated posture of a man approaching judgment. The Pentagon officials joined the call expecting clarity. Instead, they faced confusion. He stumbled through the presentation, mispronounced half the terms, contradicted his own slides, and failed to answer basic questions. The Pentagon representatives grew visibly irritated. Their patience wore thin. The meeting ended in disaster. When the call disconnected, the office fell silent. People exchanged glances that confirmed what they feared but never said aloud. The collapse had begun, and it was no longer possible to hide it. My boss had destroyed the most valuable contract the company had ever secured because he underestimated the person who built its foundation. And now, he was alone in the ruins he created. 2 hours after the disastrous technical meeting, the Pentagon sent their final decision. The contract was terminated. $9 million vanished from the company's pipeline with a single notification. The message spread through the office like an electric shock. People stopped typing. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Doors opened. Eyes widened. No one needed clarification. They all knew what had caused this collapse. And they all knew who had tried to prevent it for years. The board called an emergency meeting. Executives who usually appeared once a quarter rushed into the building with grim expressions. They demanded immediate reports from every department. They wanted explanations, timelines, accountability. The tension inside the office grew so heavy that even the air felt different. For the first time in 12 years, every eye shifted toward my boss instead of me. The safety he had always found behind my work was gone, and the consequences finally had enough space to reach him. HR was instructed to investigate the events that led to the collapse. They sent out individual meeting requests to key employees. The interviews were conducted in a quiet room with blinds half closed, the kind of environment that made people comfortable enough to tell the truth without fear. 3 employees came forward. They explained that the workload I carried was equivalent to the responsibilities of 3 people. They described the late nights, the constant emergencies, the technical tasks no one else could handle. They revealed how often my boss dismissed my potential while relying on my expertise to protect his reputation. When HR read the emails, the narrative became impossible to ignore. Every unanswered message showed delayed approvals. Every forwarded request showed mismanagement. Every timestamp file revealed how I had stayed long after everyone else had left. The numbers exposed his incompetence without needing interpretation. The timeline highlighted the precise moment the collapse began. It was not when a technical issue occurred. It was not when the Pentagon requested updates. It was the moment my boss publicly humiliated the one person capable of saving the contract. During the board meeting, he tried to shift the blame. He attempted to convince them that I had abandoned my duties. He insisted the team had struggled due to unexpected circumstances. He claimed the Pentagon's demands had changed too suddenly. But every excuse unraveled when the board compared his statements to the documents HR presented. The contradiction was so strong that several executives exchanged glances that carried disbelief and frustration. The truth was undeniable. The collapse had a name, and it was not mine. The board asked him questions he could not answer. They asked for technical details he could not explain. They asked for timelines he had never tracked. They asked for preparations he had never made. He stood in front of them like a man who had spent his entire career pretending to understand what others did for him. Without my work to hide behind, he was exposed as someone who occupied a position he never earned. The board suspended him pending full review. The announcement traveled through the office faster than the news of a lost contract. The man who once walked with inflated confidence now sat alone behind a glass door, staring at papers he could not interpret. His hands trembled. His face lost its usual color. He looked nothing like the figure who had declared I lacked leadership potential. Without authority to disguise his flaws, he became a cautionary tale. As I left my desk to refill my water, A few coworkers watched me with expressions I had never seen before. Their eyes held a mix of shock and admiration. They had witnessed something many professionals never see in their entire careers. They saw what happens when quiet consistency meets disrespect. They saw how silence can hold more power than confrontation. They saw the difference between someone who works hard and someone who only performs work. Their reverence was not loud. It was not exaggerated. It was sincere, formed from understanding instead of pity. For years, they had misunderstood the reason behind my calmness. They thought I was obedient. They thought I was passive. They thought I was comfortable being invisible. Now, they understood. I was not invisible. I simply refused to rise by stepping on others. I believe growth should come from merit, not manipulation. When that belief was betrayed, I chose myself over a system that benefited from my silence. The hallway felt different as I walked through it. People straightened their posture when I passed. Some nodded quietly. Others looked away, embarrassed by the years they had overlooked what I did for the company. I did not blame them. Most workplaces function on the illusion that leaders lead and workers follow. Now, they understood how fragile that illusion was. They had seen the truth unravel right in front of them. By evening, the environment returned to a slow hum, but nothing felt the same. The office had witnessed the collapse of a man who believed titles made leaders. They now recognized the quiet power of someone who knows their worth and refuses to accept disrespect as the price of stability. The consequences were still unfolding, and he was only at the beginning of what he would lose. A week after the collapse, I received an email that felt like the quiet confirmation of everything I had endured. Another firm, one I had admired from afar for years, offered me a position with a higher salary, a better title, and something I had almost forgotten existed in the professional world: genuine respect. They had followed the Pentagon case closely. They knew who had built the technical foundation of the project. They knew whose expertise had kept the contract alive during every difficult revision cycle. They knew the truth that my old company had spent years burying beneath politics and arrogance. Their offer was not charity. It was recognition. I accepted it without hesitation. Before I even packed my desk, the news spread across the building. My old boss had been removed from his position. The board no longer had patience for excuses or performance that relied on other people's backbones. They wanted accountability, and accountability pointed in only one direction. He had been escorted from his office earlier that morning with the same stiff expression he once used to disguise his insecurity. Now, every step he took across the hallway felt like a confession of everything he had pretended not to see. He walked past the glass walls with the heavy realization that the empire he tried to rule with arrogance had finally exposed him. As I gathered my belongings, I felt no triumph, no bitterness, no revenge burning in my chest. What I felt was clarity. My silence had done what 12 years of loyalty never achieved. I had protected that company for longer than it ever protected me. I had grown entire systems that carried their weight for years. I had kept contracts alive through crises that should have destroyed them. When I stopped offering that protection, the truth revealed itself effortlessly. My silence was not absence. It was truth without decoration. I left the building with the same calm I carried on the day he insulted me in front of the Pentagon representatives. The afternoon sun hit the glass windows, reflecting back a version of myself I had rarely taken time to appreciate. I walked through the lobby quietly, passing employees who watched me with a mixture of guilt and admiration. Some nodded, others lowered their eyes. A few whispered my name with the kind of respect that only awakens after people witness what you truly carry. I did not hold their silence against them. Most workplaces reward submission more than they reward truth. People learn to survive by staying quiet. I understood that more than anyone. As the elevator closed and carried me to the parking level, I felt something I had not felt in years. Relief. Not a dramatic release of tension, but a gentle shift inside my chest. The kind that tells you that you finally stepped into a life where you do not need to shrink to fit someone else's insecurity. The kind that tells you that choosing yourself does not make you disloyal. It makes you free. The Pentagon contract became a cautionary tale inside the industry. People whispered about it during conferences. Executives referenced it during leadership trainings. Analysts studied it to understand how a company so close to securing long-term government work lost everything in a single week. Behind every explanation, one truth remained constant. Disrespect has a price, and sometimes that price is $9 million. The story followed my old boss like a shadow he could not outrun. He became the example no leader wanted to be. The man who destroyed his own success by insulting the wrong employee. Meanwhile, I rebuilt my life with pride instead of pressure. My new office was smaller, simpler, and quieter. It felt more valuable than every spacious room I had walked through in the past decade. The work was challenging in the best way. The team treated me like someone whose presence mattered. My supervisor asked for my ideas and listened. They paid attention to my insight, not because they needed a savior, but because they valued intelligent contribution. For the first time, I contributed without feeling like I was carrying the weight of an entire department on my back. Every time I walked through the new office, I thought about the moment that changed everything. The moment my old boss declared I was not management material. He said it with certainty, without understanding the irony. He believed leadership was a performance that required a title. He believed authority came from hierarchy instead of ability. He believed power came from belittling others. He never realized that real leadership begins with how you treat the people who keep the system alive. As I settled into my new role, one thought returned to me again and again. I was always management material. My work ethic, my consistency, my resilience, my ability to stay calm through chaos, and my capacity to carry responsibility that was never acknowledged all proved it. The truth was simple. I had been working in a place where leadership was a costume worn by someone who never earned it. He was never leadership material, and that was the difference that changed everything. My silence had not been revenge. It had been justice expressed in the simplest form. I walked away, and the truth did the rest.